Enjoy.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have all of you here today at this EIP Nordic event webinar. So today we're going to talk about how organizations succeed in accessibility. My name is Kitty Dott. I'm a project assistant for EIP Nordic consultant. Today I am joined by Alexandra Bratek and Sanna Kramski. They will share their perspective on how organizations work with accessibility. So I'm really excited to have them with us today. A little bit about our agenda. We're going to have a company case from Alexandra, and then Sanna is going to talk about organizational perspective. Before we go over to some good panel discussion, and after that we will have some nice Q&A. So with that, Alexandra, over to you.
Thank you, Kitty. So hello, everyone. My name is Alexandra, and I'm working as a UI UX designer in Tieto. Tieto is a Nordic company. I'm located in Norway, and today I will show you how we dealt with accessibility during the development of one of our projects. Kitty, if you may. Thank you. So at Tieto, we build digital services for public sector, systems people rely on to submit cases, access healthcare, and interact with the government. So for our customers, inaccessible solution is an unusable solution, which means that if something doesn't work, it is not just inconvenient, it blocks access to essential services. All public services in Norway must be accessible according to the Web Accessibility Directive. That's why accessibility for us is not only a feature, but it's or a checklist. It's a part of whatever the project works at all. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the OpenGov Case and Documents, which is a public-facing solution we have developed that lets organizations publish cases, documents, and files in a transparent way to increase the democracy and help citizens to get access to important information. That makes it easier to share information, streamline the publishing process, and reduce the manual transparency requests by making documents easier to find online. And me as a designer, I joined the team mid in the process, knowing that we are going to have a pilot project within 2 months' time, and shortly after that, the release. So the project timeline, and let me first describe it a little bit. So it's a single horizontal timeline of the project from start to finish. And ideally, accessibility work would be run continuously from the very beginning, integrated into every single phase. And that's the ideal scenario, where accessibility is planned, scheduled, and followed throughout the entire process. The next one, please. Yes. But in the reality, that's not what happened. And accessibility was not a part of the process from the start at all. In the early stages, there were only a few isolated accessibility efforts, and it wasn't as systematic or continuous. So when I joined the team around the middle of the project, and I knew at that point, accessibility started to take a shape a little bit. Initially through the usability testing, which then led to more structured accessibility evaluations. And as we approached the pilot phase, time was limited, so we had to prioritize really carefully. We focused on the most critical accessibility improvements for a diverse group of users, while at the same time adapting our internal processes during ongoing development. From that point on, accessibility became more continuous, but it was still a reactive rather than building it from the beginning. So after that, we start with a combination of automated and manual accessibility testing to establish a baseline. And on the automated side, we use tools like Axe DevOps tools, the heading map, Stark, and Wave. And in parallel, we carried out the manual testing, focusing on the keyboard navigation and screen reader behavior. And this combination was actually really important because in many crucial issues only surface during the manual testing. And then we mapped out all the findings and shared in a shared Miro board, grouping issues by type and severity. And this made accessibility issues visible, actionable, and shared across the entire team, not only the accessibility specialists. Next, please. And during testing, we identified that several accessibility issues within our we found that many accessibility issues within our design system itself and not only inside the product. And it was critical because issues at the design system level tend to repeat across the entire product. So instead of fixing them case by case, we addressed them at the source. And we used Figma to manage the design system and to embed the accessibility requirements directly into components and patterns. To keep the system accessible over time, we treated it as a continuous maintained asset. We test it regularly, we are updating it, and we try to refine it to prevent regressions. The next one, please. And to track the progress and make improvement visible, we adopted the accessibility statement template, which is provided by Norwegian Monitoring Authority for Universal Design. And in the chat, you have the link to this statement. Just make sure, just to be sure, it is in Norwegian, but it's still really great to have a look at, just to understand the setup and the structure of the file. It's based on the VECA criteria and follows to systematically assess each part of the solution against specific requirements. This also gave us the structured way to track compliance, identify gaps, and plan further improvements. Importantly, it served both as an internal working tool, but also a tool to communicate our accessibility status to external stakeholders and potential customers. The next one. And as a final step, we brought in external accessibility expert, and I want to say special thanks to Kitty, who provided available insights as an independent perspective, reviewed our work, and provided an independent assessment. And it was really important to validate our findings, challenge our assumptions, and identify issues we might have missed internally. And we identified issues. All the identified issues we managed to map out were tracked in Azure DevOps, the tool we use internally in the organization, and integrated into the development backlog. And this ensured that accessibility was handled alongside other development tasks, not only as a separate activity. We prioritize issues based on the impact and severity and address them as part of ongoing development. So it was a hard and quite long journey, but going through the process completely changed how we work today. And accessibility is now included from the planning phase and carried through the entire development process. Instead of being introduced late and handled reactively, it's now integrated into our workflows and decision making. Yes. And if you think about the success factors, which actually helped us develop and grow as an accessible company, the first is the empowered team structure. And first, working as a empowered cross-functional team, which means that there is a close collaboration between product manager, design, and the tech lead. It actually made it possible to integrate accessibility earlier and make the faster decisions. The second is building accessibility awareness across the team to gather more accessibility enthusiasts. Because moving beyond minimum compliance helped shift the mindset from fixing issues to improving overall product quality. The better structure is actually starting early and iterating continuously. So addressing accessibility late creates significant overhead. Starting earlier reduces the rework and the time pressure. Accessible design system. The fourth, leveraging the design system. Fixing issues at the design system level prevented them from repeating and improved the consistency across the product. And finally, being transparent about the progress. So using the accessibility statement, create the shared understanding internally and increased credibility externally. That was all I had for you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. That was really exciting to hear about. And now to our next speaker, Sanna.
Yes. So let me remove I have a blanket because I have a cat here, so apologies if she makes an appearance, but I'll try to not disturb myself with her. So let's talk about why organizations get stuck in accessibility. But first, a couple of words about me so that you know who I am and what's my perspective here. So I'm Sanna Kramsi, and I work as a senior accessibility engineer in a digital agency in Finland called Exove. So I get to see quite many organizations at different stages of maturity. And interestingly, Exove itself is not required to be accessible, but some or even most of the work we do is under the legal requirements because we work quite a lot on the public sector and in e-commerce. And this actually brings in a bit of a unique challenge for us on a company level because, well, we aren't mandated, but the work is, so getting that into the company processes is difficult. But in addition to working at Exove, I also have my own accessibility brand called Allying with Sanna. So you might say that I'm quite passionate about this topic in general. And I'm also a certified professional in web accessibility. But what I want to share with you today is this. In my experience, organizations usually don't struggle with accessibility because they don't care. But more often they struggle because accessibility is not yet built into their processes, their expectations, and everyday ways of working, just like Alexandra showed you a moment ago. So from the outside, this can look like resistance or even lack of commitment. But often the real issue is much more practical. The ownership is unclear, teams are just overloaded, and accessibility is treated as something extra rather than part of quality. And I want to share with you 3 common accessibility traps and how you can try to avoid them. So the first one is one of the most common patterns I see, and that is the hero trap. So that is essentially when accessibility depends on one person. There's usually one person who really cares about accessibility. They probably know the most. They advocate for accessibility. They review things. They answer questions. And gradually, accessibility becomes associated with that one person. And this may look positive at first, because at least someone is doing the work, right? But it causes several problems. First of all, it creates a review bottleneck because, well, one person only has so much time available. And then it creates another one, which is interesting to me, because then other people don't build their own skills because, well, they'll think that, well, why should I? Because that person is taking care of everything. And then accessibility ends up getting personified instead of operationalized. And last but not least, the person carrying all of this is at a real risk of overload and burnout. So what works better is shared ownership. Not everyone needs to be an accessibility expert, but everyone should know enough to do their own part in an accessible way. Yes, you did already, sorry. So the second trap is the checkbox trap. And that is when accessibility is technically mentioned somewhere. It might be mentioned in requirements, in procurement, in a definition, even in a policy. But still, in practice, the workflows don't change. So some people might say things like, well, it's a requirement, so it has been taken care of, naturally. But naming accessibility is not the same thing as embedding it to the actual work itself. And this, in my experience, is where a lot of organizations get stuck. So they might have the right words and the ideas, but not the right habits. For example, design decisions are not checked early enough, or they might not have support in their work. Developers don't have enough support in their tools, components, in their work in general. Content teams are not guided on accessible writing. Testing happens too late. Well, assuming there is actually some testing, because that is a thing as well. So what works instead is making accessibility part of the normal delivery. So define what accessible done actually means. Build checks into the workflows and try to catch the issues earlier, not at the end. And last but not least today, the third trap is the communication trap. So a lot of organizations assume that if people just learn about accessibility, they will automatically act on it. And while awareness matters, it's not enough alone. Because in real work, people are constantly busy, they're stressed, and they're being measured on delivery speeds. So even when they care, they might still not know what accessibility even means for their specific role, what they should be doing differently tomorrow to make things better, or how accessibility actually improves their work. So this is why the broad awareness messaging is not enough on its own. Different roles need different kinds of language and different guidance. We have designers, we have developers, content people, quality assurance, procurement, leadership, and so on. They each need to understand their part. And importantly, they all need to understand that they really do have a part in this. So what works better is, well, having that role-based guidance, providing practical examples and ongoing support, and usually connecting accessibility to goals the teams already care about, such as quality, efficiency, risk reduction, and consistency. So, if those three are the traps here, what does success look like instead? And from my perspective, successful organizations usually do four things. Well, they do more than that, but these are the four things I'll talk about. So first, they move away from the hero culture and they create shared ownership and they have leadership support to make sure that they actually can make some changes. And second, they build accessibility into the normal workflows instead of treating it as a final check. This can include things like better design patterns, code linting, continuous integration checks, content guidance, and just accessibility in the definition of done of a task or of a project. And third, they do support people in a practical and role-specific way. And they don't only focus on why accessibility matters, but how to do the actual work. And fourth, they stop framing success as perfection, because accessibility maturity grows over time and progress really matters. So you're already succeeding when issues are found earlier, when teams are more confident, when regressions decrease, and when accessibility starts to feel like normal work. So, make accessibility part of the normal work. It's not a side task, it's not one person's job. So if I leave you with one practical recommendation today, it's this. Don't treat accessibility as a specialist review at the end. Put one clear accessibility expectation into each role's normal workflow and go from there, because that is how organizations actually move forward. Not through one passionate person, not through one training session, not through a checkbox in a requirement document. They improve when accessibility becomes part of how they design, how they build, how they write, review, and decide. And that is usually what organizational success in accessibility looks like in practice. Not perfection, but accessibility becoming business as usual, one step at a time. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you so much. That was really a good start for the panel. I'm really excited to hear so many good advices on how we actually can succeed. So while going over to the panel, we can stop sharing the presentation, and I got some questions. Do you have any special place where you learn about accessibility, Alexandra? Where did you start?
That's a really good question. I think everyone have their own ways of learning. I did multiple different courses. I also did the ALI course to actually begin with, and then I moved towards I would say more official ones. The one from IIMPA course, the CPAC course for accessibility expert. I actually did my exam last week. Finger crossed that everything went well. We are also having internal discussions. As a design team, for example, we are kind of sharing the knowledge. We are trying to share links to any additional sources about how can we improve accessibility. As Sanet mentioned, it's accessibility is not like done overnight. It's like a continuous work. So we are also under it's a continuous learning curve. So I wouldn't say that it's like one particular course I would highly recommend. I think people should try to find those which they can follow in their own pace, because it's really important. Accessibility is nothing you can learn during one night. I think this is something you should practice. But definitely the one I did from the CPAC course from AIP is one I can highly recommend.
Sanna, based on your experience, what is the most practical recommended for organization aiming to improve accessibility? You spoke a little bit about that in your presentation.
Yeah, I think it comes down to processes essentially. I would probably actually start from there because, well, obviously, because I speak from experience, I've tried several types of things, and I have tried to start with, the empathy route, because I thought that once everybody understands about accessibility, they will automatically care. But that's not the most effective thing. So trying to get those processes in place, starting from whether it's a new tool or an audit or something like this, I think that would be my recommendation as a first step. Of course, it depends on where the organizations are, but there's always improvements to be made in processes.
I agree. Do you have anything to add to that, Alexandra?
No, I don't. I think everything has been said really clearly.
Was there a specific accident or incident that, for example, made you value accessibility clear to the team or to get it to the team?
Is that question for me or for both?
Alexandra?
I would say, like in my case, the case I presented today, it was the first project in the company, which was mainly when we had the main focus on our citizens. So we are kind of we changed the way of thinking a bit, and then we had to really think about that our users are really unique. We don't really know who is on the other side, like on the other side of the screen. So when we started the project, we really had to change the way of thinking about it. When we start the conversation with politicians, with journalists, with usual citizens, and ask them like, what do you expect to see? How do you want to use the project, the product, the solution itself? People had really different opinions on like how it should work, but not only from the usability perspective, but many mentioned that I cannot really see. I need glasses, so I would really highly appreciate if the contrast is good. Or so they started to mention things people are maybe not so aware of when creating the digital solution, as we are kind of used to getting it as a final product, and we are not really thinking about those who have a special needs. So I would say when we started to get those feedback about like, please make sure that it actually works with the screen reader, because this is the functionality I really need. And then we start to kind of go into the depth of it, and then we understood that okay, I think we need to have a step back and look at it from more accessible perspective, as we managed to see that there is there were some gaps in the project, and we had to really correct it before it actually went live.
Do you have any experience with any incidents or things that makes accessibility clear to the team, Sanna?
Well, I've seen quite a lot of different things. So, well, one quite clear one is the empathy route. So I've had several people come to me after I've given a training that, hey, I didn't know this. And then, because, well, we all live in our own bubbles. And if you don't know anybody who is, well, we obviously know everybody probably knows somebody who has a disability, but we might not know that they have one. So once people start giving those examples that it might look like this, it might be this kind of a barrier, that opens their eyes. And another good example that I've seen with developers specifically is that when they actually will start to learn to use a screen reader, because then they realize that, wait a minute, this is super hard. Because I had one recently who was starting to do some accessibility fixes, and the original state was quite horrible. You know, every single form field had an ARIA labeled called input on a Finnish website, so it's not even the correct word. But there were 10 or so fields, and each of them that said that. And when they went there with a screen reader to test, you know, the original versus the one that they fixed, they sent me a message that, wait a minute, this is super horrible that these people, that I couldn't understand anything. And that is really powerful. You know, give people a bad example and then let them see the better example. That's
true.
I've noticed that that's powerful.
I think we learn a lot of when we see examples like that. Like you mentioned, it's
But I
the
think
actions that we learn.
If I may add a comment to what Sanna has said now, I think because I talked about the business case, the real case from the company, but I also experienced my personal struggle with using a mouse. And because I don't really have any disability, like the mobility disabilities, I'm a kind of visual user. I'm using the mouse, I'm using the keyboard, and unfortunately I broke my wrist for some time ago, and it was my right wrist, and I'm right-handed. And unfortunately, I had to work, and then I understood that I cannot do my job anymore. And it was really like eye-opening experience when I had to use my Mac in a completely different way. The mouse, it wasn't really useful tool anymore, which I have never. I would never thought that, because like I'm using it all the time, and unfortunately, I was unable to do that in quite like it was about 3 weeks where I couldn't really do anything. I had to use the keyboard. And then I started to go deeper into the keyboard shortcuts, how to use the Mac with the voice command and stuff. It was an eye-opening experience. And I think I would highly recommend, not to broke any wrists, but like to try out using your Mac or your PC in a way you have never done it before, because then you will get this real experience how it may be for some other users. So
I agree. What helps make accessibility a natural part of the organization's workplace? One thing is processes, and I think communication as well. But do you have any tips on the processes that can be put in place? Sanna?
I would probably start from, you know, getting those automated tools in place, because that's a fairly powerful and simple enough, you know, and that allows us to catch issues earlier, that allows us to actually make the monitoring more consistent. So that would be my number one. Choose a tool. It can be a free tool. It doesn't have to be expensive. Deque has the Xcore available that you can just use in your project and have the code checked. But that is really something, because then people would start to see that, hey, there's again this blocker in my coding that I can't get this commit push to the production because the tool is giving me an error. and it's something that they can fix themselves. So maybe that one would be my choice.
Do you have any, Alexandra?
I'm thinking about trying to get more people into the accessibility. And as Sanna mentioned, it's not about having everyone as an expert, like accessibility expert, but having them as enthusiasts who are having it in the back of the head every time they are doing their job. And then I'm talking about the PMs, developers, designers, everyone who is having something to do with the project. Even if you have someone who's going and having the interview with the potential customers, you can have it in mind to ask about, like, do you have any users who may have any concrete needs? Like, is there any like accessibility requirements you think are super important to cover because you know about the person? Just having this accessibility in mind every time when you do something project related. It doesn't have to be much. It's just have a conversation around it, share some insights, share the concerns. I think it's really, at least from my perspective and from my experience, people are always thinking that you need to be an expert to share something, but you don't really have to be an expert. It's enough to just mention it loudly when you have a conversation in the team, like, "Hi guys, I came across this and this, and I'm not sure if it's correct. Should we just have a look on it?" And because then you can be sure that you are not going to miss anything, because it's not one man's job. It's actually entire team's job to be to make sure that your solution will be accessible. So more accessibility enthusiasts rather than experts could be really powerful thing.
Very good. I think there's a lot of good advices here for companies and for enthusiasts in the team to bring it forward. And I think that is an important step of it. I hope I can see already that there is a lot of questions running in. So if you have any question as well that you would like to ask, please share them in the Q&A. And with that, I think we will jump over and see, because I see that we already have some questions here. Where should people start when they feel overwhelmed? Sanna.
Yeah, well, it depends on the situation, because if you're, for example, overwhelmed because you're all alone, then I would suggest that try to find someone to help you out. Of course, that's not always possible. At least with myself, it's helped a lot that when I'm overwhelmed, that I write things down. What is it that I'm trying to do? Where are the struggles? And then start forming a bit of a smaller plan. Because, well, at least because I'm super passionate about the topic, I went in, well, I've always gone in like, okay, let's fix this thing. Let's make it perfect right now. That doesn't work. It's too much for everyone involved. So yeah, maybe, trying to get the smaller pieces and then going from there. And then the friend. Even one friend can help. And it doesn't have to be someone working in the same company. It can be another accessibility expert or enthusiast. It can be anybody, but have someone, who you can vent to. That is super helpful.
Do you have anything to add to that, Alexandra?
No, I think it was a perfect answer to that question.
I think we have to start somewhere. I think the most important thing is wanting to start or doing it. Just taking that first step. I had one where it says that, Alexandra, you mentioned the list of automated testing that was in the beginning. Could you mention some of the ones that you use?
Yes, I can. I'm not sure if I should type that answer to make it kind of available for everyone, but I can mention them at least. It's we used multiple ones just to we wanted to test out multiple different solutions, and we actually ended up using them all, which, for example, is the X DevTools, the headings map, all the plugins into your web browser. We are also using Stark and Wave.
I think here it's a good place to mention that even though automatic tools are really nice, it doesn't find all
No.
of the mistakes, not by far. So it can be an indicator, but it's not the answer. What kind of experience do you have around that, Alexandra?
I would say that having the automated test is the one thing, because then you will get like really nice overview over things you should fix. But for example, based on my experience, it was also regarding one of the questions in the chat regarding how can we create more value or more impact when we talk about accessibility. How can we convince people that accessibility is really important? So, for example, based on the experience, we had the situation when I don't remember exactly which one it was. One of the automated tool has found out the problem of the keyboard navigation. We couldn't really use the keyboard to go through the solution we developed. And it has been mentioned in the automatic report, but not in a way that it was understandable for the higher leadership and the team itself. So when I managed to demonstrate it, so I did my manual testing when I tried to tap myself through the entire solution, and I showcased it to the team, and they were like, "Oh, but if you don't have a mouse, you cannot enter this function, you cannot use it," and it kind of created like the real impact, because they could understand, they could see it, that if we have someone who cannot use the mouse, will not be able to do the action, to use the function. So I think automated testing is really great if you want to just run really quick tests for your own safety, but I wouldn't use only this one. I think the manual testing will also give you the better understanding of how the solution works in the real life. And will give you the deeper understanding of what should be improved.
I agree. What should I do if I am the one accessibility expert in the company and I am getting constantly ignored? Sanna.
I feel that question so deep in my heart. Yeah, it's really hard. So, well, it depends on what you've been trying to do. Well, the friend answer helps here as well, trying to get more people than just yourself. But at least I've run into a problem, we all know what the economic situation has been, there are wars going on and everything. And I get hit in the face with, I don't have the budget for it. We can't do it. Then we need to try to find those, smaller things that, hey, if we do this one thing, it only takes us a minute to do it and it will do all these wonderful things. Then the business case, and unfortunately I have to use the word money, becomes the thing. At least in my experience, when I'm being ignored, it's that from the people who are like, well, we can't afford that. Go do something else. So we'll really need to shove it in their face, show them the numbers, show them, because with them, empathy doesn't work. And I'm so sorry that you've been ignored, because I know how frustrating and painful that can be. So, but yeah, hopefully you can find a friend. For example, I have a colleague who we just decided that, hey, let's do this together. And whenever we end up in that situation where we're being ignored or someone gives us a annoying response, we can then go talk to one another like, I really hate this. And then we can try to figure out, okay, what is our next thing that we will try to do? So yeah, that's long and difficult answer, I suppose.
I agree. It's difficult to be in that one. but I think keep on trying and showing the value. I think showing the value is the way to go forward. I also think that with accessibility, our solutions become better. So in the user experience in general, and we want our solutions to be as good as they can. It's about the navigation, clear navigation, being able to know where you are. So there's many arguments that you can use when you see the user experience is for everyone. Hi, Alexandra. The one person in the team responsible for accessibility through the project. Are you everyone quality responsibility? What did your team start up like?
It was really a long question, so I hope I managed to kind of grasp the. So,
are you the one person responsible for accessibility in your project, and are everyone equal responsible? What did your team setup look like?
So I must say that now I'm talking from my own personal setup in my team, which may vary from team to team. But in my case, I'm the only designer in the team, and I'm having 8 developers. They are also backend, full stack, and the front end, and we are also having the project manager. I may be the one who is mainly responsible for the accessibility, but it doesn't mean that I need to fix bugs in code, for example. So I'm trying to kickstart the entire accessibility discussion. I'm trying to keep it up, that we are doing as a continuous work throughout the project. If there is an accessibility breach, or if any of our customers are commenting on, hi, I think we have some accessibility issues, could you please have a look on it? It will come to me, but it also comes to the PM and the tech lead, as we need to figure it out. Where is the error? Is the issue in code, or is the issue in the layout and the UI? So I wouldn't say that that I'm responsible for accessibility. As I said, it's really important that everyone will be an enthusiast, like accessibility enthusiast. Everyone should have some sort of feeling responsible for creating accessible solution. So I know that every single developer in my team has been taking accessibility courses. Of course, it was mainly for the developers, so they are thinking more about how the code should be structured to make it accessible. But we are trying to spread this enthusiasm around creating accessible solutions. So it was really a long answer. I'm so sorry, but it's really hard to really grasp it into really short answer. But I wouldn't say I'm the 100% responsible. I would say like the team who is still, if we are having the shared ownership for the product we are developing, the accessibility will also be shared across the entire team.
Do companies that lead by example have dedicated users to perform manual testing and provide feedback to features being released? What is the most efficient way to get feedback when something goes to production? Sanna?
Well, at least start talking and then thinking. That's the way to go. In our case, we actually have I'm 50% of our accessibility team. We have 2 persons who actually does the accessibility work, the billable work, audits and that kind of stuff. And we are then the internal people who get asked to do things. We are trying to get people to learn how they should be testing things themselves. But we are always there as support, and we've told people that, hey, if you don't know how to test it, for example, with a screen reader or a keyboard or anything, they can always come to us. So in a way, we have us, but we are not involved in every single project. But we are a digital agency, so that might be a bit different from, a company that has their own product. But usually it might make sense to have people who really know that stuff. Sometimes it might be actually the actual users that have those user tests in place. Because while I manage with a screen reader, I have my site, so it's very much a different experience when I use a screen reader than someone who actually uses it every day.
I know that some teams have dedicated testers to do testing after it's been developed, and some of them have really good experience with accessibility and do specialized accessibility testing. But I like what you say, Sanna, that testing it with users as well. That's the best way to give feedback. I also think that having solutions where they have a way to let you know if there's something not working. So that's a way to reach out to actually give information that this wasn't accessible, or I couldn't see this, or I couldn't navigate here. That would, whatever the challenge is, if it's too much text as well, then at least they can inform about it and make sure that that message goes to somebody that actually reads it, if you have it on your solution. But I think that it's even free to get user feedback in this way. You get the best feedback and it's free. How would you recommend an organization to calculate the financial cost of not doing accessibility by design? Do you have any way of doing that? Open question.
I think it's a hard question because it depends on the organization, the maturity of the organization, the accessibility maturity in the organization itself. And for example, for those countries which are actually affected by this European Accessibility Act, for example, for those who are actually creating public-facing solutions, we need to think even more about it from the financial perspective, because we can encounter fines, really bad feedback from the customers about the company itself. So I would say it's only about like calculating the financial cost, but also how the company will be perceived by others if we do not. From my perspective, I think being compliant with WCAG requirements, and in general trying or being accessible is being seen as a strength, which will have a direct effect on the financials. So I would say like accessible solutions are being easily sold to the customers, as continuously more people are interested in seeing fully accessible solution, and it became a really important factor for many. The calculation itself is not an easy thing to do. Maybe Sanna has some additional comments to that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer either. I've read somewhere that it can be somewhat 10% more, but from the developer's perspective, sometimes we have to redo it essentially if we're fixing it later. Or then you might be able to calculate that, if we now do a task and then we push it to production and then we notice that's an issue, then someone will create that new ticket in the ticketing system. Then someone will have to fix it. Then someone will have to test it. And especially if it's something that, somebody has pointed out that, hey, this is a problem, then you might have somebody else do some testing as well. So all of a sudden you might have 4 to 5 people do something just because you're doing it again. So that might be a concrete thing you can calculate, depending, of course, how you do things in the organization. But it's not perfect, but it is more expensive.
And it may have like a direct effect on the development process, which of course will end up with being an additional cost. Like in the case I presented, when you could see on the timeline this extensive period of accessibility work, it it was really challenging as we had to allocate 3 people from the team who only use their time during the week to fix all the accessibility things we managed to map out, which of course ended up that the entire development process had to reduce its speed, like the development speed, because of that. So I would say like you can also try to calculate how many hours you need to spend to correct the issues if you find any, versus if you could have 2 hours during every week for the accessibility work as a hard-coded time allocated for accessibility work.
I also think that you can measure success by how many customers do you have now that actually can use your solution, but it depends on your solution, right? And then again, I think satisfaction is super important. Having a good solution is having an accessible solution. So I think that's super important. We have so many questions here, but I think we have to round it up here. Thank you both so much for your presentation and your answers to the questions and for the interesting conversations we have had. I really appreciate it. With that, I wanted to share a little bit about so if you want to know more about certifications or have any questions, we have our EIP office hour where you can sign up for a free webinar. It's a drop-in session where you can ask questions, and it takes place once a month in our time zone. So the next one will be on 13th of May at 3 p.m. on Central European Summer Time. So the link for that will come in the chat as well, or you can scan the QR code and sign up. They are really interesting, so I would recommend that. As well, we are always looking for volunteers to our local committee in the EIP Nordics. So if you are interested in supporting the accessibility community, reach out to us. So here we will have about professional certification committee and member benefits committee, and also about webinars and events. So it will be different interesting things there. And with that, we would thank everybody for your time, and especially Alexandra and Sanna for your contribution today. That has been really nice. And Peter for having the technical support. I really appreciated that. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending today and wish you all a great day. Thank you.